It all began with a smile, a simple, fleeting smile that would sow the seeds of my greatest betrayal. My name is Clara, and for 8 years, I've lived what anyone looking in from the outside would call the perfect suburban life. I married Eric, a driven and successful finance professional whose career demanded frequent trips to distant cities. Our home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with manicured lawns and friendly neighbors, was meant to be the dream we'd both worked so hard to build. But over time, the dream began to feel hollow. Eric's absences became more frequent, his focus more consumed by his career than by the life we were meant to share. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that all marriages went through ebbs and flows. Yet, as the years dragged on, loneliness crept in, wrapping itself around me like a heavy fog. It was during one of Eric's week-long trips to Chicago that I noticed Adam for the first time. He had moved in next door a few months earlier, but we'd barely exchanged more than a wave or a polite nod. Adam was tall, athletic, and carried an air of easy confidence. His smile was warm, disarming, and it felt like it could melt away even the heaviest of burdens. The day I truly noticed him was the day a storm rolled through our neighborhood, leaving the backyard fence partially broken. I was out there struggling to lift a splintered plank when his voice startled me. "Need a hand?" he called from his side of the fence. I looked up, surprised but relieved to see him standing there. "If you don't mind," I replied, brushing my hair out of my face and trying not to focus on the way his muscles flexed as he climbed over the fence. He made quick work of the broken fence, his movements efficient and assured. I watched, a mix of gratitude and a strange nervousness settling in my chest. When he was done, I offered him a glass of lemonade, and we sat on the patio, chatting. It felt innocent, two neighbors making small talk, but there was an undeniable spark in the air, one I tried to ignore. Eric had left just the night before, and his absence felt more pronounced than ever. Sitting there with Adam, listening to his laugh, and seeing the way his eyes lit up when he spoke, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, seen. Over the next few days, our paths crossed more often than before. Adam would wave as he mowed his lawn, and I found excuses to be outside more frequently, hoping for a chance to talk to him. One afternoon, I decided to bake cookies, a rare indulgence, and brought a plate over to his house. "Clara, you didn't have to do this," he said, his grin as warm as ever. "It's nothing, really," I replied, brushing off the flutter in my chest. But it wasn't nothing. The flutter wasn't nothing. And neither was the way his presence lingered in my thoughts long after he'd thanked me and closed the door. The night before Eric left, we'd argued. It wasn't our first fight about his work, but this one felt different. "You knew what my job required when we got married," he'd said, his voice tired. "And I didn't think that meant spending half our marriage alone." I shot back, my frustration spilling over. The next morning, he left without the usual goodbye kiss, and the house felt emptier than ever. That day, Adam showed up at the door again, this time offering to help trim the overgrown bushes in the backyard. "Looks like a jungle out here," he joked, flashing that same easy grin. We spent the afternoon working side by side, our conversation flowing effortlessly. By the time the sun set, the yard looked better than it had in months. As Adam turned to leave, I found myself staring after him, my thoughts muddled. I knew I should have set boundaries then, but I didn't. The next time Adam knocked on my door, it was with a wrench in hand. "I forgot to return this after fixing the fence," he said, his grin slightly sheepish. Instead of handing over the wrench and leaving, he lingered. "You doing okay?" he asked, his tone soft. I hesitated. "I'm fine," I lied, though the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe me. "You just seem like you could use some company," he said. We ended up sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of wine between us. The conversation started light, but soon grew deeper, more personal. I told him how distant Eric had become, how lonely I felt in a marriage that seemed more like a partnership of convenience than a union of love. Adam listened, his brow furrowed with concern. "You're incredible, Clara," he said, his voice earnest. "If Eric can't see that, then he's the one missing out." The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine. I knew it was wrong to let myself feel this way, but his words filled a void I hadn't realized was so deep. That night, as he leaned in to kiss me, I told myself it was just a momentary lapse in judgment. But one kiss turned into two, and before I knew it, I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The following weeks were a blur of stolen moments and growing guilt. I tried to act normal whenever Eric called, but the sound of his voice only deepened my sense of shame. Still, I couldn't seem to stay away from Adam. He was magnetic, and being around him felt like an escape from the emptiness that had taken root in my life. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and mine was no exception. Eric wasn't supposed to return until Friday evening, but the sound of the front door slamming shut on Thursday afternoon froze me in place. I was in the kitchen, my heart racing, as I quickly closed the text conversation I'd been having with Adam. "Clara?" Eric's voice echoed through the house. I plastered on a smile and stepped into the hallway. "You're home early," I said, trying to sound casual. "Flight got canceled," he replied, his eyes scanning me in a way that made my stomach churn. "Everything okay?" "Of course," I lied. That evening, Eric was quieter than usual, his presence filling the house in a way that felt suffocating. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with fear that he might somehow know what I'd done. The next morning, my fears were confirmed. Eric had found the texts. "Who's Adam?" he asked, his voice cold and steady as he held up my phone. "He's just a neighbor," I stammered, my face flushing with panic. Eric's expression darkened. "Just a neighbor? Then why are you texting him things like, 'I can't stop thinking about last night'?" The truth came tumbling out in a flood of tears and halting explanations. Eric's face was a mixture of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. "Unbelievable," he muttered, pacing the room. "In our house, Clara? While I'm out working to provide for us?" I tried to explain, tried to tell him how lonely I'd been, how I felt like I was living this life alone. But my words sounded hollow, even to me. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Eric said finally, his voice shaking. "This isn't something you just come back from." And then he was gone, leaving me to sit alone in the silence of a house that felt emptier than ever. In the weeks that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. I sought therapy, determined to understand how I had let things spiral so far out of control. I reached out to Eric, apologizing and promising to do whatever it took to make things right. Eventually, Eric agreed to meet, but his terms were clear: a separation. "This will give us both time to figure out what we really want," he said, sliding the papers. My heart broke as I signed them, but I knew he was right. Months passed, and slowly, I began to find clarity. I realized how much I had neglected my own emotional needs, and how I had relied on Adam to fill a void that only I could address. When Eric showed up at the door 6 months later, he wasn't holding papers this time. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "And I don't want to throw away what we had without giving it one last shot." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes," I whispered. Rebuilding our marriage wasn't easy, but for the first time in years, we faced our problems together. It was painful, messy, and slow. But it was also the beginning of something new, a chance to create a stronger, more honest foundation. The weeks after Eric left were the longest I'd ever endured. The echoes of his voice, the sight of his empty chair at the dining table, and the absence of his clothes in our shared closet all served as constant reminders of my betrayal. Every corner of the house was a testament to the life we had built together and the cracks I had allowed to form. At first, I tried to distract myself. I joined a yoga class, began volunteering at the local animal shelter, and even considered taking up painting again, something I hadn't done since college. But no matter what I did, the ache in my chest remained, a dull, persistent weight that refused to lift. Adam, of course, tried to reach out. He knocked on my door several times, left messages on my phone, and even slid handwritten notes under my door. But I couldn't face him. Seeing him again would only deepen the guilt I already felt, and I knew I needed to distance myself from him if I had any hope of salvaging what was left of my marriage. Or myself. Eric, on the other hand, had gone completely silent. For weeks, I heard nothing from him. Not a text, not a call, not even an email. I knew he needed time to process what had happened, but the silence was unbearable. I replayed our last conversation over and over in my mind, dissecting every word, every look, every moment. One evening, I gathered the courage to call him. When his voicemail picked up, I left a message, my voice trembling. "Eric, it's me. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for everything. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm working on myself. I'm seeing a therapist now, and I'm trying to understand why I made the choices I did. I just hope someday we can talk. That's all. Take care." I hung up, my hands shaking. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Therapy became my anchor during those dark days. My therapist, Dr. Morgan, was a kind, middle-aged woman with a soothing voice and a knack for asking the right questions. She didn't judge me for what I'd done. Instead, she helped me explore the deeper issues that had led me to that point. "Clara," she said one afternoon, "it's clear that you felt lonely and neglected in your marriage. But do you think those feelings justify your actions?" I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "No, they don't. But at the time, it felt like I was drowning, and Adam was the only one who noticed." Dr. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "And do you think Adam truly cared about you, or do you think he saw an opportunity to fill a void in his own life?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never considered Adam's motivations before. I'd been so focused on my own pain that I hadn't stopped to think about what he might have been seeking in our relationship. One rainy afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store, I spotted Eric in the parking lot. He was loading bags into the trunk of his car, his movement stiff and deliberate. For a moment, I froze, unsure whether to approach him or let him leave. But then he looked up and saw me. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, the world seemed to stop. "Clara," he said, his voice neutral but not unkind. "Hi, Eric," I replied, clutching my grocery bags like a lifeline. "How are you?" "I'm okay," he said, his tone guarded. "And you?" "I'm trying," I admitted. "I've been seeing a therapist. She's helping me work through everything." Eric nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's good. I'm glad." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Look, I have to go, but maybe we can talk sometime. Just talk." My heart leapt at his words, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'd like that, I said softly. Over the next few weeks, Eric and I began meeting for coffee. Our conversations were tentative at first, filled with awkward silences and careful words. But as time went on, we started to open up to each other in ways we never had before. I felt like I was losing you long before Adam came into the picture, Eric admitted one evening. I just didn't know. I felt the same way, I said, my voice trembling. But instead of talking to you about it, I made the worst mistake of my life, and I'll regret that forever. Eric sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forget what happened, Clara, but I do want to try to forgive you, for us, and for what we had. Just as Eric and I were beginning to rebuild our relationship, Adam resurfaced. He showed up at my door one evening, his face a mixture of desperation and determination. Clara, I need to talk to you, he said, his voice urgent. Adam, I can't. Please, he interrupted. Just hear me out. Reluctantly, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I miss you, he said, his eyes searching mine. I know things got complicated, but I can't stop thinking about you, about us. There is no us, Adam, I said firmly. What happened between us was a mistake, a terrible, selfish mistake, and I can't keep doing this. Adam's face fell, but he nodded slowly. I understand, he said quietly, but if you ever change your mind... I won't, I said, my voice steady. Goodbye, Adam. As I closed the door and leaned against it, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Adam was a chapter of my life that I was ready to leave behind, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Eric and I continued to work on our marriage, attending couples therapy and rediscovering the connection that had brought us together in the first place. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt and pain, but we faced them together, one step at a time. In the end, our relationship wasn't the same as it had been before the betrayal, but maybe that was a good thing. We had learned to communicate better, to be more honest with each other, and to appreciate the love we shared. And though the scars of the past would always remain, they served as a reminder of how far we had come and how much we were willing to fight for each other.